She called me her finest act of generosity, said it from a hotel ballroom stage in front of 400 people with the easy confidence of a woman who had spent years learning to reduce someone precisely enough that a crowd reads it as wit. The room laughed. Foundation trustees, legacy donors, the kind of people whose names appear on hospital pavilions and university lecture halls. My wife raised her champagne glass toward the audience and smiled as though the moment had been designed entirely around her. I was seated 9 feet behind her at the head table. Beside my untouched glass sat a sealed ivory envelope. Inside it, a prenuptial agreement she had not looked at in 8 years, an updated asset schedule, and a filing confirmation stamped 5 days earlier at my attorney's office. I remember watching the room laugh with her and thinking how remarkable confidence becomes when it has never once encountered its consequences. I need to take you back to the beginning, not because the beginning explains everything. It doesn't. Anyone who tells you a marriage's end is fully contained in its opening is selling you something. But the beginning tells you something about the specific geometry of what we were. And that geometry is the only way to understand how what I'm about to describe was possible. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 45 years old. I'm a civil infrastructure developer who spent the first 14 years of my career building a regional practice in Atlanta, then spent the following 8 years quietly converting that practice into something considerably more substantial through a series of decisions that were methodical, patient, and almost entirely invisible to anyone who had already decided they understood what I was. That last part matters. I'll come back to it. I met Claudia at a philanthropy reception at the Intercontinental on Peachtree in the fall. 11 years ago. She was 33. A partner-track attorney at a firm that handled estate planning and nonprofit governance, which explained her fluency in those rooms. She had been navigating them professionally for nearly a decade. She was striking in the way of women who have understood that composure is leverage and chosen to wield it deliberately rather than perform it. Present, calibrated, always precisely one register more composed than the situation required. We dated for 2 years. She brought me into her world in stages. Board dinners, firm events, lake houses in North Georgia, the specific social ecosystem of Buckhead professional life that maintains its own hierarchy and its own very efficient method for assessing new arrivals. I passed the assessment. Quiet enough not to threaten. Capable enough not to embarrass. That, I would come to understand, was exactly the configuration she needed in a husband. Before we married, my attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh, 62 years old, who had handled my father's estate before he handled mine, recommended a prenuptial agreement. I remember Claudia's response clearly. Mild annoyance, managed within seconds. She signed it at her kitchen table in her midtown apartment on a Wednesday afternoon with the brisk efficiency of a woman processing a clerical formality. She never asked what it said. That was 8 years ago. We married in September in a ceremony her mother organized, in a garden in Vinings that held 140 guests, and that I attended with the genuine gratitude of a man who understood he was being welcomed into something not originally built for him, and who intended to be worth the welcome. For the first 3 years, I was. The change in Claudia happened the way changes happen when they matter. Not in a single moment, in the accumulation of small things that individually have explanations and collectively have a different explanation entirely. She was appointed to the board of the Hargrove Children's Foundation in our 5th year, a significant position in the social architecture of Atlanta. The kind of role that placed her in regular contact with the foundation's major donors, its executive committee, and the broader network of established philanthropic families that constitute the city's actual power structure. She was well suited to it. She had the intelligence and social precision the role required, and she brought to it the same calibrated ambition she brought to everything. She also began spending considerable time with a man named Reed Halstead. Reed lived 6 houses from us in our Buckhead neighborhood, in a house he had purchased after his divorce was finalized the year before we moved to the street. He was 48. Private equity. The specific variety of physically maintained and socially polished that a particular level of money and time produces. He served on the Hargrove board. He was the kind of person Atlanta understands immediately and routes to the appropriate table without requiring further information. Claudia mentioned him the way you mention weather. Incidentally, contextually, without apparent weight. Foundation meeting, Reed thinks. Reed suggested. Reed has a lake house on Lanier that the Gala Committee is hoping to use for the donor preview. The mentions came with sufficient frequency that I began cataloging them the way I catalog site survey data. Not with suspicion, precisely. With the attention of a professional who understands that patterns in data are information, and that information ignored is not information neutralized. I said nothing. I began paying closer attention. The public diminishment was subtle at first. She was too skilled for it to be accidental. Claudia was a woman who understood language with an attorney's exactness. She knew what words meant, what they implied, what they permitted a listener to conclude. When she began directing that exactness at me in social settings, I recognized it as a decision. At a dinner hosted by the Foundation's executive chair in February, a guest asked about my firm. I had recently completed a significant infrastructure commission, a project that was, by any professional measure, a meaningful achievement. Before I could respond, Claudia said, "Nathan's work is very structural, very technical. He keeps things standing so the rest of us don't have to think about it." Laughter. Warm. The kind that closes a subject rather than opens it. A Reed Halstead's house the following month. A Sunday brunch for the Foundation Committee to which I was invited in the particular way spouses are invited when their presence is assumed rather than sought. Claudia described my professional background to a new board member as very precise, very functional, the kind of work that doesn't make for interesting conversation, but that someone has to do. Reed had laughed at that one. A short, specific laugh directed at Claudia, the laugh of a man acknowledging a woman's wit in a way that was intended for her and not for me. I picked up my coffee, set it down, and noted with the precision of a man cataloging structural data that Reed Halstead had laughed before the sentence was fully finished, which meant he had heard some version of it before. That was March. In April, I called Warren Holt. Warren had been referred to me by Gerald Marsh, who described him with characteristic brevity as thorough, discreet, no editorializing about what he finds. I retained Warren on a Monday afternoon and gave him the minimum necessary information. The name, the address 6 houses down, the approximate timeline of what I suspected and why. Warren worked for 11 weeks. He called me on a Friday morning in late July and asked me to come to his office. I went. The file he placed on the desk between us was organized correctly, chronologically. Supporting documentation attached to each entry. A financial summary at the back that told its own story without requiring the narrative sections to carry it. 14 documented instances of Claudia and Reed Halstead meeting outside contexts that included either of their respective households or the Foundation. A hotel in Midtown, 4 occasions, Tuesday afternoons, charged to a corporate account connected to Reed's firm. A lake property in Dawsonville that Warren identified as held through a trust connected to Reed's estate structure. 2 instances Warren described as documented through means he outlined precisely and legally. Duration: at minimum 9 months, potentially longer. Warren's window was 11 weeks, but the established pattern suggested a longer runway. $41,000. Warren placed the financial summary on top of the file and looked at me with the neutrality of a professional who has delivered this category of information many times. I looked at the number. 41,000, I said. Over 9 months, Warren confirmed. The transfers are detailed on pages 15 through 20. I read pages 15 through 20. Then I closed the file, thanked Warren, took the file, and drove to Gerald Marsh's office, where I sat for 2.5 hours while Gerald read what I had brought him and then explained, with the methodical patience of a man who has practiced this for 38 years, what the prenuptial agreement Claudia had signed at a kitchen table 8 years ago actually contained. Gerald had drafted the prenuptial agreement himself. He had drafted it carefully, the way he drafted everything, with the specific precision of a man who understood that documents written for good circumstances need to hold in bad ones. He had included provisions I had not focused on at signing, because, at 37, I had not considered the exact circumstances under which they might become relevant. They were relevant now. The marital misconduct provision was clear and documented. In the event of proven infidelity by either party, asset division reverted to the premarital schedule, a schedule that reflected my premarital holdings, with an accuracy that had become considerably more significant in the 8 years since signing than it appeared at the time. The premarital schedule listed the assets I had brought into the marriage. At signing, those assets were solid but not exceptional. The infrastructure practice, an investment account, a partial interest in a commercial property held through an LLC my college roommate and I had established in Smyrna. What the schedule did not reflect, because it had been written 8 years ago, and I had not discussed it with Claudia in the intervening years, was that the LLC interest had been sold and reinvested. The investment account had compounded substantially. The infrastructure practice had been converted into a holding structure that Gerald had helped me establish as a separate legal entity, quietly, over the preceding 4 years. The premarital asset schedule, applied as written under the misconduct provision, produced an outcome that Gerald described in his precise language as decisively favorable. I sat with that for a moment. She doesn't know about the holding structure, I said. She would have no reason to, Gerald said. It isn't a marital asset. It predates the marriage within the applicable window, and it was never disclosed because disclosure wasn't required. The house, I said. Titled in your name as primary, Gerald said. Premarital down payment documented. The prenup's asset schedule addresses it directly. Page 7. I looked at the ceiling of Gerald's office for a moment. The Hargrove Gala is in 5 weeks, I said. Gerald looked at me. Claudia chairs the evening program, I said. 400 attendees, board members, major donors, the people she has built the last 4 years around. A pause. You want the room, Gerald said. I want the room she built, I said, and I want it to be the last room she performs in before she understands what's happened. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he began writing a list of documents that his office would need 5 weeks to prepare correctly. 5 weeks is a specific amount of time. Long enough to prepare everything correctly. Short enough that nothing changes in the interim. No confrontation. No premature shift in the atmosphere of the house that might signal to Claudia that the ground had changed beneath her. I attended the Foundation's October committee meeting, sat at the same table as Reed Halstead, accepted a glass of wine I did not finish, discussed the gala's live auction logistics briefly with the event's director. Reed and I spoke once for approximately 3 minutes about a scheduling conflict with the venue's loading dock. He was cordial. I was cordial. Two men in the same room who understood the room differently than the other one knew. I attended 2 more Foundation events, helped Claudia review the evening's program, noted the seating arrangement she had placed me at, head table, beside a board member I had spoken to at previous events, a placement that was logistically appropriate and socially peripheral. I made no adjustments to the placement. I was not concerned about the seating arrangement. Gerald's office completed the documentation on a Thursday afternoon. I reviewed every page with him for 2 hours, every exhibit, every figure against the schedule. Then I signed where indicated, picked up the sealed envelope, placed it in my jacket, and wore that jacket to the gala 5 days later. The Whitley Grand's Chandler Ballroom holds 400 at round tables and carries the particular warmth of a room designed to make large sums of money feel intimate. We arrived at 6:30. Claudia was in her element from the moment the car door opened, the Foundation's events director meeting her at the entrance. A brief exchange about the evening's program. Then, the specific social acceleration of a woman who has been anticipating a room for months and is now inside it. I took a glass of champagne from a passing server and followed at the appropriate distance. The next hour was the theater of a charity gala. Donor conversations, the careful choreography of board members and their spouses, the management of a room full of people who all need to feel individually seen before the program begins. Claudia was extraordinary at it. I watched her work with a specific recognition of someone who understood the skill without sharing the motivation, warm with the consequential donors, economical with the lesser ones, genuinely funny in the particular way that makes rooms feel safe enough to open their checkbooks. Reed Halstead arrived at 7:20. He was across the room. He and Claudia registered each other with the practiced indirection of people who have learned to be careful. A half-second of eye contact. The specific realignment of posture that is too small for a crowd to read and too deliberate to be random. I noted it, filed it, took my seat at the head table when the program began at 7:50. The envelope was on the table. No one at the table examined it. In that room, it looked like what it looked like. A document. The kind of thing a board-adjacent husband carries to a formal event. No one asked. The evening's program moved through its stages. Welcome remarks. A short film about the Foundation's community impact. Donor recognition. A live auction. Claudia was at the podium for each segment. Composed, warm, precisely as good as she had prepared herself to be for this room over the preceding months. At 8:50, she reached the personal segment, the emotional anchor of the evening as she had described it to me at home. A brief address about the Foundation's mission, delivered in her own voice, that the communications director had helped her draft. I watched her adjust the microphone, settle her posture, and begin. The address was good, genuinely good. She spoke about the Foundation's reach, about the families who had been served, about the particular responsibility of people given abundant lives to extend that abundance with intention. The room was with her completely. And then, 3 minutes in, she arrived at the personal moment. She looked toward the head table, found me, smiled. I have to say, she said, with the warmth of a woman sharing something real, that I am acutely aware of how fortunate I am, not only in the Foundation's work, but in my life at home. My husband Nathan is here tonight. I held my expression steady. Nathan has supported this work from the very beginning, even when I know it asks a great deal of a very patient man. She smiled at the room. I sometimes say that marrying Nathan was the most generous thing I have ever done, because the man has spent 8 years being quietly dragged to evenings like this one. Laughter, real laughter, 400 people. But in all seriousness, she continued, he is my finest act of generosity, and I hope he knows how much. I stood up. The movement was quiet. A chair pushed back, a jacket adjusted. The specific posture of a man who has decided the moment has arrived. The table noticed before the room did. I picked up the envelope. I walked to the podium. The room watched, not with alarm, with the particular stillness of an audience whose program has deviated in a way they have not yet categorized. Claudia looked at me. Her smile held for exactly 2 seconds, beyond where a natural smile would have ended. The professional hold of a woman buying time to assess. Nathan, she said quietly, away from the microphone. I stepped to the microphone. I apologize for the interruption, I said. The room's acoustics were good. My voice was level. Claudia, I wanted to give you this tonight, in this room, with these people. I held out the envelope. She looked at it. She did not take it immediately. It's from Gerald Marsh's office, I said. Gerald has been my attorney for 22 years. The prenuptial agreement you signed in 2016 is the first section. The asset schedule is the second. Warren Holt's documentation is the third. Financial transfer records are the fourth. The divorce filing is the fifth. The room had gone silent. 400 people in formal attire in a ballroom that costs more per evening than most people earn in a year, producing the specific dense quiet of a crowd that has just understood it is witnessing something that cannot be reversed. Reed Halstead, at his table across the room, had not moved. I looked at him once, directly, then back at Claudia. The account separation was processed Tuesday, I said. The house. Gerald has the deed documentation in the packet. My name. Premarital contribution schedule. The prenup addresses it on page 7. Claudia's hand was on the podium. Her other hand extended toward the envelope. She took it. She looked at the seal, then at me, then at the room. At 400 people she had spent 4 years assembling into an audience, and I watched the cold, complete understanding arrive in her face. Not dramatically. The way structural failure arrives. Not loudly. Just completely. The evening is yours, I said to the room. I apologize for the interruption. The Foundation's work is real, and the families it serves are real, and none of that changes tonight. I nodded to the events director, who was standing at the edge of the stage managing her expression carefully. Then I stepped off the platform, walked the length of the ballroom, and pushed open the door into the lobby, where the air was cooler and the chandeliers were quieter. And I stood for a moment in the specific silence of a man who has just set down something he has been carrying for a very long time. Behind me, through the closed door, I could hear the sound of 400 people beginning to process what they had witnessed. I straightened my jacket and walked out of the Whitley Grand into a November evening that was cold and clear and entirely mine. Reed Halstead resigned from the Hargrove Foundation Board 12 days later. Gerald mentioned it as a factual development, without commentary. Gerald does not offer commentary. His wife, a woman named Patricia, filed for divorce in January. I know this through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it with the careful uncertainty of someone unsure how much I already knew. I knew everything. Claudia called 27 times between the night of the gala and the following Wednesday. I answered on Tuesday, after Gerald confirmed that her attorney had received the full document package. She was not performing on that call. The register was different from the podium, quieter, more exposed, the voice of a woman who had spent 4 days reading 5 sections of a legal document and understanding, with an attorney's precision, what each section meant. She asked about the house. I told her Gerald would handle all questions through counsel. She said, "You planned this for 5 weeks." "Gerald needed 5 weeks to prepare it correctly," I said. "Warren needed 11 before that." A long pause. "The gala," she said. "You gave me the envelope in front of 400 people." "I thought the room you built deserved the full context," I said. Another pause. Longer. "Nathan. Gerald will be in touch." I said, "That's right," and ended the call. The legal proceedings were handled by Gerald and a family law specialist he brought in, a woman named Catherine Voss, who had a reputation among Gerald's colleagues for being the attorney you engage when documentation is comprehensive and needs to be applied with precision. The prenuptial agreement held. The misconduct provision was triggered. Warren's documentation was, as he had guaranteed, thorough and legally sound. The premarital asset schedule was applied as written. The holding structure, which Claudia had never examined, was documented as premarital with the specificity that Gerald had spent 38 years developing for exactly this kind of moment. The house was addressed on page 7. Claudia moved into a leased apartment in March. The foundation did not issue a public statement. The events director sent me a brief professional email 2 weeks after the gala, noting that the evening's fundraising had exceeded its goal and that she hoped I was well. I thanked her and meant it, my finest act of generosity. I have thought about those words in the weeks since, not with anger. The anger, such as it was, had been metabolized long before the evening of the gala. What I think about is the confidence those words required, the certainty of a woman who has assessed a man, placed him in a category, and grown so comfortable with the category that she will perform it warmly and publicly in front of 400 people. That certainty assumes the man is exactly what he appears to be: quiet, accommodating, present but peripheral, the kind of person who can be described as an act of generosity without consequences, because the description is accurate and the person lacks the standing and the will to contest it. She was wrong about all of it. Not dramatically wrong. The particular wrongness of someone who stopped examining because they were certain they had already seen everything. I had never been what she described. I had been, for 8 years, something else, building, observing, preparing with the specific patience of a man who understands that structural decisions require time and that premature action undermines outcome. The prenup was drafted in 2016. I signed it and said nothing about what it contained. For 8 years it sat in Gerald's files, irrelevant and unexamined, waiting for circumstances that might never arrive. They arrived. Gerald prepared for 5 weeks. Warren prepared for 11. I prepared for the room. And on a November evening, in a ballroom that seats 400, I walked to a podium and handed my wife the document she had signed at a kitchen table 8 years ago and never read. She read it that night. By section 3, she understood what she had done. By page 7, she understood where she was going to live. By the 5th exhibit, Warren's documentation, organized chronologically, supporting evidence attached, she understood that the version of herself she had been performing in that room for 4 years had just concluded. Not loudly, not dramatically. With a sealed envelope, a clear evening, and the specific, irreversible weight of a document that had been waiting patiently for exactly that table. I drove home, unlocked a house that was and had always been mine, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where, 8 years earlier, I had first sketched what the holding structure might eventually look like. I thought about what I was going to build next. If this story found you somewhere real, subscribe. New stories every week. And if you've been described as something you aren't by someone who stopped paying attention, you already know what that sealed envelope felt like in your hand. I'll see you in the next one.